Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for December 3rd, 2021. I'm Benji Fisher, sharing my screen and moderating. And also present are Aaron Mikhail, Antonia, Afir Shal, Ralph Kohler, and Thomas Howell, right? Currently logged in from his personal machine. We usually see him from a different machine. And yes, the issue I'm sharing on my screen is 3201550. Add new content manager role to the standard profile. And Ralph posted a link into the Zoom chat. So this is a companion issue, a sibling issue to one that was fixed as part of 9.3. I guess 9.3 is scheduled to be released next week. And that added a content editor role. And the idea is that the content manager should have some permissions that the content editor doesn't have. And on small sites, you might assign both roles to the same person. But on larger sites with a team of editors and a team of reviewers, the content editor role would be given to presumably more users, and then a few users would have the content manager role. And there haven't been any comments on this recently. I guess the most recent one is from me back in March. And I think I should probably mention that this will need an update. There was this problem. The content editor role was 3059984, and that ran into trouble shortly after it was committed. Another issue, roles should depend on the objects that are building the granted permissions, was committed. That was 2571235. And the impact of that issue on both of these is that we can't assign permissions to either role, content editor or content manager. We can't assign permissions unless the modules that provide those permissions are also part of the standard profile. And I see that Christina has joined us. Anyone else? And Jim Birch just joined us as well. So we're going to have to make a similar update to the content manager role, and we'll have to remove from this any permissions related to workflows, because the workflows module, last I checked, is not part of the standard profile.
That's a decision we've made deliberately, right? We've decided that the workflows should not be part of the default standard.
I am pretty sure there is an issue somewhere to add it to the standard profile, but that issue is still open. So it's still being debated.
So I seem to recall that in past conversations around these two issues, Aaron and I sort of agreed there might be space to start talking about more than the really rudimentary profiles that are what you get out of the box. And I don't know if that's a topic that needs to be broached before we dig into this, because I find the content manager without a workflows functionality and permissions really becomes very questionable, because that's its raison d'etre of having a manager. The editor, I could see you don't have to have workflows, but I don't see a reason to have this if you don't have a workflow type environment that you are managing.
Is there a reason why the permissions for that couldn't come with a module itself? Maybe I lost part of the conversation, but wouldn't it be possible to be added when the module is installed?
Technically, I think that's hard. When a module is enabled, you can create additional config. So I guess that I guess that the content manager role could be part of the configuration of the workflows module, so that when you enable the workflows module, you get the additional role. I don't know if we want to do that, but I think that's possible. I don't think there's a way for a module to add permissions to an existing role when it's enabled.
It might be technically possible, but sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
It's just that I don't see the value on the standard profile. I mean, I see the value on when you have workload, having the content manager permission set up and everything. It goes tight and it makes a lot of sense. It's just that I don't see the standard profile, which is the minimum that we are trying to have. Why it should have permissions that don't belong to something that is that people that at some point it has been decided to not have enabled by default. So if the model is not enabled by default, why should we have these permissions in there?
You're asking why not have the permissions?
I mean, I know that technically it could be the easier way. It's just that I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
So that was this issue 2571235 that frankly Alex Pott felt very strongly about, that we should not allow permissions that are related to uninstalled modules. So
that we should or should not?
We should not allow such permissions. And this was the issue that was committed shortly after we originally fixed the content editor role and required a follow-up to the editor role to remove permissions related to uninstalled modules.
So I have a question about this, and maybe you're not familiar with this issue, but what happens in the event that you uninstall a module? Like you have workflows, and that's there in the standard profile, and then you remove it. Like I guess my question is, doesn't that result in a role having permissions in the same state as if the module had never been added?
Well, that's part of this issue, and I'm very familiar with this issue because I'm the one who reviewed it, got it to our TPC. And the answer is that when you uninstall the workflows module, all the permissions that it provides will be removed from any roles that have them.
So then if it's reinstalled, all of that is lost.
Yes.
So if there were, for instance, anyway, it doesn't matter. That's, oof. As a site builder, I hate that, but I can understand why, for consistency's sake, you want something like that. I wish there was a way to add or manage adding sets of permissions specific to this in an easy way. I mean, I think there are ways to do it from the if you dump it down to file and then isolate the permissions, but just doing it from a site building from a UI perspective, I don't know how you do it, because I've run into problems years ago where you'd have either a vulnerability or a bug that was in a module and you'd have to temporarily remove it. And if that blew away the permissions, because to bring the site back online, you had to disable a module and you lost all the permissions, that could really mess a site up.
Right. So I searched on the page for this issue for the word Monday because I remember making a comment about the hypothetical Monday module, which is enabled once a week and disabled the next day, and the permissions are lost. And I pointed out in this comment, currently the permissions hang around, but after this issue goes in, they won't be. So that is something that we explicitly discussed on the issue. And I think the answer is that there is no way in the admin UI to get the old behavior, but if you're managing your site with config management, then at the same time that you have the change to the enabled modules, you have the changes to permissions. And Aaron, did you want to say something on this question?
Yeah, I sort of have like 5 different thoughts that were banging around in my head and all competing for my voice. So I'm going to try and say the ones that make the most sense. I think we're entering into an interesting conversation that we've, as Thomas said before, we've had around what is the standard profile. And for me, I think the standard profile lacks a bit of like focus or direction. And I know there's issues to define what should be in the standard profile. But by virtue of its name, it's like standard. It's a pretty vague kind of what goes in. I think the best way to think about the standard profile or any other profile that's provided by core is when you install a site with that profile, it's a sensible starting point. And as soon as you do something that deviates from what that profile provided, you've moved into a more custom site. So an example of uninstalling the workflows module, you've done that for a particular purpose because you're now customizing your site and you don't want the workflows module. But if you then go and reinstall it because you realized, oh, I wanted another module, maybe I don't want content moderation, for instance, maybe I want another module that provides some workflows. The permissions that you were previously there, I would be a bit nervous about us just re-adding a bunch of permissions because maybe they no longer work for your specific site. Incidentally, the workflows module on its own doesn't provide any permissions. It's like content moderation, or maybe it provides one permission, but it's like content moderation that provides most of them, or the other sort of workflow providers that provide the permissions. So, I think there's an argument to say that we shouldn't be thinking about profiles like standard or minimal as a living thing. We should be thinking about them as these are sensible starting points. And after that, yes, it's up to you to configure your site appropriately, but we can't possibly know what every configuration of every module is going to be. So it wouldn't make sense to start adding in permission configuration on install. I guess that was a long-winded way of saying that profiles are starter points, basically.
Yeah, I'm sharing my screen. I searched the ideas issue queue for standard profile. And I think the color module is part of the standard profile. There's an issue to remove that. I guess I thought there were more issues to add and remove things from the standard profile. And Aaron, you're suggesting that we should just close all of those and leave the standard profile as standard.
Well, I mean, I'm all for adding new modules to the standard profile, but I think we need a bit more of a strategic vision as to what the standard profile needs to be. And if we don't have that, then as we discussed before, maybe we need separate profiles. Maybe we need a profile focused on content editing, and maybe we need a profile, I don't know, for something else. That's the only one that comes into my head, but like, because that's what Drupal does really well out of the box. If you want like a commerce site, you're going to be installing like the commerce starter kit or, you know, commerce modules, you know, and maybe this is a conversation that should be looped in with the project browser, because I floated the idea of, hey, what if you could install contrib profiles right from the installer, you know? So I think there's a wider discussion there as to what the role of profiles are in Drupal going forward, and or in the sense of from the sort of site building perspective. But I'm also trying to find the issue I mentioned about there's an issue discussing where the what modules should be added to standard. It's currently active.
So the issue for the content editor was initially just for adding just a content editor, and it ended up opening like talking about two profiles, like the content editor and the content manager. Other people ask for other profiles, but it always ends up as a conversation that just you have to talk about the whole standard profile. And I think we are kind of deviating, or we are moving from the main issue, which is what it was agreed, like adding these two profiles by default. If we actually want to discuss what the standard profile should be doing, like probably we don't want an article content type and we want some other content type. I think that's a bigger conversation. And if we want to do everything, probably we're not going to get anything in. So I will propose to just like the content manager specific issue, just do the basic for what we've had so far. What Benji was saying, like just, or what I understood, he was saying like just add the permissions that we have or we need right now, and I'm super fine just having, I mean, it makes a lot of sense just talking about the standard profile as something to improve, because we've been working with something that was decided like some years ago, and it probably needs an update. But yeah, we're kind of, I have the feeling that if we keep discussing this, we will probably not end up on an agreement for the content manager issue.
Right, so getting back to the content manager issue, I think, Christina, you've also brought up in the past that adding additional profiles to core means we need to find someone to maintain them, which is a pretty big job. And I know that you're responsible for the umami profile, so you have, you know what you're talking about on that issue. So are you saying that you still want to get the content manager role into the standard profile, even if it has only a few additional permissions?
Yeah, so the idea is that when we added the content editor, we added a few permissions that belonged to the content manager edit profile. So the idea here, from here, if I recall it properly, it goes like removing a few of the permissions from the content editor and adding them to the content manager. I mean, it's not that I say that those two profiles are the ones that need to be there. It's just that it was a conversation that included a lot of people that actually works with content strategy and a lot of final users. It's just that it's a conclusion of both some research and people feedback. So that's why I mean, let's just get this in, and obviously we can have the conversation about the profile, but I think it's a way bigger one, and this won't be able to be closed otherwise. So like that, there are other ideas, like for example, the dashboard that could really take a lot of advantage from having the two profiles, so we can show the dashboard for two different profiles. I think unless we have this, nobody's going to think about what we can actually do if we don't have the two of them. So yeah, I think,
But,
yeah.
but what are we doing with the editor role if it has no different permissions? Like because what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm misunderstanding it.
It does have different permissions, the content manager and the content editor. It should have.
Because it sounded like a majority of them were related to the workflow or to the content management.
You can see on the screen, the ones at the top.
Yep.
Are the ones that will just belong to the manager, like delayed article revisions.
Right, but I thought a lot of I thought so for manager later are those, but aren't like, so it's revisions, delete media, delete page revisions, for all revisions. So those are unrelated to the workflows.
Right. The first 6 permissions here are not related to workflows. Exactly. The last 3 are related to workflows.
Right. So all we're really getting is we're saying it deals with deletion. So the manager role exists predominantly to separate out deletion.
To separate, sorry?
To separate out deletion. So if we're losing transitions, if we're losing what I think of as like actual managerial things, what we're saying is we want a special role that manages deleting content.
Yeah, to have a bigger, to have another level on content management, which is probably deleting, which is probably sometimes if with other modules, which is probably publishing.
Right. So I get that, but it sounded like we couldn't add roles from other modules. So that's something that I didn't understand. So and it was something Benji said. It sounded like once you've added the manager role, if you add the workflow module, there is no way for it to add use editorial transition archive to that role, or is that an incorrect statement?
There's no good way to do it.
So for the role to have a lot of value to me as a site builder, I need to address that problem of making it easy for modules to add and remove sets of permissions to an existing role. Like I agree, systemically, I really want this role very badly. And everything that you said, Christina, makes sense to me. But my concern is if it goes in and we don't have a follow-up issue to ensure that we can still get the permissions added in that it is expected to have, that it's kind of very hollow, because all that it does is delete and revert revisions.
Well, I guess it sets a path to go, or it defines what different roles can actually do. I mean, it's an opinionated role. It's, I don't know.
I love all of that. Like, I agree. My issue isn't with what we want to do with it. It's as a site builder, if I opened up the software and I put this in there, I would be very confused by what it actually did when I saw it. Because I'd go and I'd be like, that's all it does is delete things. Like I would be confused as a site in my role as an active site builder, not if I was. It's just, that's what's confusing to me is I had thought, oh, you install workflows, you install any module, it's going to say, hey, this role exists. I can add these permissions to that role for you. But if we don't have that facility, if we don't have that feature or capability, then it's somewhere where I have to manually choose to add those things, and that's great, but that's a much more advanced user or site builder than someone who wants to use the role right out of the box. And that's my concern, is out of the box without the workflows module, it doesn't seem to do a whole lot other than it manage deletion.
I don't know.
So-
I see it as a base thing to work, to build on top of. I think like most of the things in Drupal, it's just the basic thing where you will build things over it and you will create the site and whatever you want to do in there. I mean, I see it more as a starting point rather than a complete feature. But yeah.
It's sort of like the blank page syndrome, that sometimes the hard part is getting started, and having the role there is a significant cognitive step, even if it has very few permissions.
So so everything that was said there, and I can see the vision that you're going for, Thomas. And I think that's a really, like, the idea that you could enable a module and it will be like, hey, would you like me to add these permissions to these roles? Like, I think that's a good idea, but how we get there is probably involves like 20 different steps. And I think the first one is probably, well, one of the first steps is building a business case essentially for having that like feature there. And so part of that would be, let's have a content manager role in core, because the more of these roles that justify why we would have this, then the bigger the justification is. And part of that is saying as well is, when we get that in, yeah, maybe it doesn't have like the content translation permissions at the moment, but if content translation is to go in the standard profile, then one of the tasks for that issue could be to add these permissions to the content manager roles, so that when it does get into the standard profile, and personally, I don't see a reason it shouldn't be in the standard profile, but so when it does get in there, part of that commit would literally just be updating the YAML file for content manager and adding in the necessary permissions. And yeah, there's probably ones for the content editor role as well that we took out, or we had to take out for content for the content. What's the name of the module? Too many words. Whatever the name of the content workflow module is, it's completely went out of my head.
Content management, I think.
Content moderation.
Yeah, content moderation. That's it. There's too many content words going on right now. It's
That's currently installed. I just want to demonstrate something. Let me uninstall it.
it's got dependencies.
Uninstall it so that I can reinstall it again and show you. One thing that we did to make life easier for site builders, and it really addresses one of the points that Thomas made. So this is something new in Drupal 9.3, that when you enable a module, you now get a link to configure related permissions, and that goes to just the permissions for the content moderation module. So, so that does make it easier for the site builder to adjust permissions after enabling modules.
Okay, and I think that's enough of a site builder improvement. And I remember working on this. Like, I think we talked about this 6 months ago or something, but this is, it went in. So this should be enough to facilitate making having the extra role useful. I was worried about it being there and people not knowing what to do with it and being like, this is mainly empty and it's a shell. But I think there's really good arguments for why it needs to be there.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to Aaron's point that there are lots of moving pieces here, and lots will be handled in separate issues. And this addresses one of your complaints.
NJ, shouldn't the workflow permissions also be displayed there? I'm just looking at the URL and I see it only has content moderation, but wasn't it supposed to also display the dependent module permissions?
Does workflow depend on moderation?
I think it's I think so. Content moderation should depend on workflow, and then shouldn't the permissions then show up? Or
I uninstalled content moderation, but I did not uninstall workflow, so it is not a newly enabled module. That's why it didn't show up.
oh,
If I had started with the standard profile and enabled content moderation, then both would be enabled at the same time, and I would see permissions for both of them at the same time.
oh, that's interesting. So because the permissions link right there constructs the URL including all the dependencies, doesn't it?
No.
Oh, I guess no. Okay. In fact, there isn't any. I'm just wondering where the permissions are for the states that get installed, unless content moderation doesn't install any states by itself and transitions.
Yeah, that has to do with the optional configuration in the profile and working with the site based on Umami. So right. I'd like to wrap up this discussion and get on to another issue. So I think we're coming around to agreement that even though it only has a few permissions, we should move forward with the content manager issue. And I think the next step is to update the discussion. And I guess there isn't yet an active patch on this. It's a pretty easy issue to implement. So we need to update it, pointing out that we can't add permissions from modules that are not in the standard profile. And then it's a pretty small step to provide a patch that actually implements it. So I will add a comment unless someone else would like to.
I would really appreciate it if you did that. So because you have other references also.
Sure.
I think one of the other actions possibly is if there's a issue to add content moderation to standard would be to potentially in that issue or create a follow-up for adding probably as a follow-up for adding the additional permissions to the content moderation role. Sorry, right. Content manager role.
Okay, so I'll have to search for the issue to add content moderation to the standard profile and add a comment there.
Yeah, it might exist, it might not, I don't know.
Any other comments on this issue before we move on? Okay, I think Jim, or would you like to talk about the issue with tours?
Yeah, hi, thanks everybody. Could I share my screen and pull up the issue?
Yes, certainly.
It's a nice, fun one from 2013. Allow tours to be taken by users that cannot access the toolbar, 2069073. So basically, I've been kicking around the tours issue queue. In 9.2, tours were upgraded to remove a dependency on the Joyride library, which is an abandoned jQuery JavaScript library. And in its place, it was replaced with the vanilla.js Shepherd library. And it uses Shepherd tours to guide users around the website. So in this instance, there's a demo here. Maybe not. Oh, there we go. So you can basically have it attached to a DOM element, or if it DOM element isn't specified, it appears as a modal. Very nice. It's all keyboard accessible. In Drupal, tours have always been implemented using the admin toolbar, or in Drupal 8, the toolbar. Sorry. So if you click on the tour in the toolbar, you get the tour to pop up. This issue is to allow tours to be taken by users that can't access the toolbar. So the solution that was introduced was to create a tour block, so that button could be placed anywhere on your site and allow people to take tours if they want to. This opens up tours to not only Drupal, the admin side of it, but it also opens it up to visitors of a site. So you could create tours for your actual front end of your site. And it's pretty easy to do using contributed modules like Tour UI or Tour Builder. So this is a long issue. Basically, it went through a lot of revisions. In the actual tour itself, the tour question mark was arised as like that's not very UX friendly. Lori came in and introduced the nomenclature of take a tour, which was well accepted in the thread, and it was very styled and opinionated what they were doing in the thread. To sum up, I made a patch at the end that just applies the button class. So I feel like the take a tour nomenclature basically specifies what this action does if you're going to click it or select it. And just having the button class, and there is like a BM tour-button class also. But just having the button class allows the theme to style it. So in this case, this is Bartik. We can change it to the other themes here. Go to Vero. Site. And now the tour looks like Olivero's buttons. We'll go to, say, 7. Site styled like 7's tours. So it doesn't have anything to do with the tour itself. The tours themselves all have their own styling in the theme layer, or they don't. If they don't, it's pulled from the actual tour module in Drupal core. This issue is just about this tiny little button. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have there, or what are the next steps?
So what are the usability concerns?
Originally, it was flagged as needing usability review because there was styling in the patches. I guess my first question is, because I've removed all the styling and it's just a button that is placed by Drupal core, or a block that is placed available in Drupal core that places a button on your site, does there need to be a usability review?
So I guess the only thing, so I agree with removing all the unnecessary styling. Should be up to the theme. I think so. The only thing that we can really comment on is the text of the button. Maybe whether it should be a button. I don't know. Is it actually a button or is it just a link styled to look like a button?
It is a button that triggers JavaScript.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's any potential issues with whether it's better to be a link or a button. Nothing. I guess that's more on the accessibility side though, so perhaps it needs an accessibility maintainer to have a look. But I don't have any concern. Like I don't have any particular concerns myself.
Something that you said about removing the styles, I would say probably more than removing the styles, I would move them to somewhere else. Like not getting the style flows, probably moving them into either 7 or Claro or Classy or I don't know, something like that.
So I actually found that the styles that were in the patch were all based on the Joyride library and were no longer needed based on the new Shepherd library. And, as far as the tours themselves, 7 and I believe Claro both have tour styling libraries in them.
Claro doesn't, not yet.
So if there isn't any objection from UX, do I remove those tags or do I get one of you to remove those tags and specify that it doesn't need UX approval?
I think you can do that yourself.
Okay.
Generally, when we discuss an issue, we say explicitly that it was discussed at the meeting, and we provide a link to the issue for today's meeting, and that's where the recording of the meeting will be available once I get around to it.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you for bringing the issue.
Yep. The only thing I would suggest is maybe just asking if you're in Slack, asking the accessibility channel because I am concerned as to I don't know if it should be a button or a link. Part of me thinks a button is fine, but another part of me thinks it needs to be a link. So,
well, a button would be used to trigger JavaScript. A link should be only used for linking to a URL.
Sure, yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I will definitely see if they want to look at it.
Yeah, I would just run it by them just to be on the safe side. Like someone like Andrew McPherson will probably be able to give a definitive say there.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
it's then that way it's accessibility review is done and there's no more other blockers, I guess you could say, in that sense.
And there was a lot of accessibility issues with the Joyride library that Shepherd library has taken care of too, which is nice.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Great, thank you all.
And creating a block that can be positioned anywhere seems like a good way to solve the problem. That's
For sure.
Okay, we still have 10 or 15 minutes left. I guess.
Can I ask just a really selfish question about that block? Is it is it defined in a Twig template? Like, I'm just genuinely curious because I might end up using it in a project. Like, is it a Twig template or is it like a hard-coded render array?
Let me look. From the patch.
And meanwhile, I'll share my screen again. Um, And Christina, I think you said that you'd like to continue the discussion of updating the user edit pages, and the parent issue is 3251513. Did you have something more specific? And in chat, Jim says there's no template yet. Ralph, see you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've reviewed the profile page and found a few more actionable points, and I could also either add to the issue and make a write-up, or we could talk now about it. Or if Christina has more, we could do her points first. I don't know. And I also went through the ideas queue as well as a few in the core issue queue, which might apply to the points we've talked about. A few existing issues. In the idea issue queue, there isn't any related, but there are a few in core.
Okay. So, okay, why don't you go ahead and talk about the new things you noticed?
Okay. On the page itself, last time we already talked about the hard-coded block, and that leads to some sort of issue because at the moment, based on the label, if I read in the manage form display, you have the point username and password. And at the moment, based on the label, would expect it consists of two fields instead. It's the current password field, the new password field, the email address, and the status, radio button, and roles checkboxes. So it's quite a bit more. And there's also, and one minimal step might be to improve it, what we already talked about last time, to change the order of the hard-coded block to username, email address, password, status, and roles. And a more preferable step might be split up the components and make them configurable and enable disabling and reordering additional to the change of the default order. And there is one issue I could link. It's for 9.2. It's split up and change username and password field. And for Drupal 7, there is one move email field below password field to avoid confusing password managers.
So the first issue linked is 1176568, and that's for Drupal 9. And then this other issue is very old.
Yeah.
382124 for Drupal 7. Are there any screenshots on this? I think I know what they're talking about. Screenshot would be nice. So only have a few minutes. So what are the next steps here that we should talk about?
Well, I could write up the points I saw and added to your issue in the IDQ, and then others can comment about. Maybe.
Okay, or we could at least list these as related issues.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Probably something that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I think this one actually is potentially a first step to getting the wider idea that we discussed of like a multiple forms, which we seem to be quite in favor of, because we would need that potentially. We would need this like to be in before we could do that in a way that doesn't involve hacking a whole load of things. So this would be a good one to get done, I think.
I would probably say we should probably do either of some research or just paste here some examples from across, from any other app or project where we could find some patterns or something that it's, but to find out what is normal nowadays to be found in a profile. Like the profile section, we usually have like my account or I don't know, this kind of things, or which items we could find on this maybe menu or specific pages. I don't know.
Are you mean in terms of the sort of information architecture, like the menu and
exactly
tabs?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so when I posted a comment on last week on one of the issues, I noted so services like Twitter, Microsoft, Google, they all have these, they all split out the flow. So those would certainly be well established patterns that you can pretty much bet other sites have followed. So if we wanted to do a bit, have some screenshots, I think those would be good places to go to, because those certainly have that pattern. And in fact, for instance, if you were to similar to how we split out the role configuration from the user account settings form, if we do have all of these on separate forms, it makes it a lot better for contrib when, if say you install a two-factor authentication module, that module could then has a sort of a architecture to work within to have like either like a dedicated 2FA page, or have it on the password form, or there's potentially some sort of framework advantages to it as well there.
But one thought about moving those confirmations or the change for password or email to separated pages is the use case if a user wants to change the email address and the password in the same go, meaning the user would have to enter the current password twice. It might be annoying from a user's perspective.
So I think what we discussed before was that anything that requires the existing password be moved to a separate form. So that would move both the email address and the password to that form.
To the same form, okay.
Yeah, I think this might be me when in my comment, that might be me like after the call being like, oh, there's another example of like have a separate login details form that anything to do with like login information, and that might even be a good first step in a way, because maybe we don't want to introduce like 3 new forms all at once.
Yeah.
Right, and what I'm sharing on the screen now, 1259892, is the child issue. And this is where Aaron and I both commented. And yeah, I specifically suggested create a separate form for changing the password and email address. Only that form will need the current password to be entered.
Mm-hmm. I think this also helps the experience of if you're doing, say, like, if this is more so for when eventually the issue lands, to have like confirmation emails for when you what is it again, for when you change, if you change the password or change the email or something, you have to like, you get one of those things, or whether it's the reset password function, the link that you get sent just takes you to the general like user edit form, which by separating these out, it would then instead take you to a more specific like password form or login details form, which is potentially a better experience.
Yep, agree.
Okay, we have just a couple of minutes. Any closing comments? Okay, then thank you for coming, everyone. And I'll be here again next week. And I'll try to get the recording posted to the issue within a day or so.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Benji.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.